Halfway through the season, it's always a good time to chat a little NHL draft, and that's where we're going with Chris off the bat here. A lot of midseason rankings coming out, Chris, and Shane Wright holding on to that number one spot in them. But the question is, do you think he can hold on to that number one spot for the rest of the season here and when we get closer to the draft?
Yeah, if we were having this discussion, a couple months ago, I would, say there's no chance. But really, as you talk to scouts around the league and as you look at some of the public lists that have come out in the last few, and mine will be out next week on Daily Faceoff, there's at least some conversation that, hey, maybe it's not as safe as we thought it was before. It got a lot to do with the fact that I think the bar was set so astronomically high by his exceptional season in the OHL. Then he didn't play anywhere last year. So, that's a lost year of development. He played in the World Under 18 Championship. He was exceptional there, playing through illness and injury. And so you say, okay, well, that year didn't really affect him. Well, now we're seeing in this season, his numbers aren't quite as good as they were in his 15-year-old season, which is definitely something that you worry about. And I also think, he's not even the top point producer for this draft eligible season in the OHL. So when you see that happening, and when you see a guy that has proven it before, you say, okay, is he taking steps backwards? And we always poke holes in these top guys, and we try to create drama and things like that. But this is a year where I actually feel like, there's some merit to it that he has not lived up to the expectations, and maybe he's a victim of too lofty expectations. But really, what it comes down to is no one else has officially taken his place. No one has raised their hand and say, I'm the better prospect. And so that's why we still, based on the full body of work and everything we know about Shane Wright, why we still have him number one.
Okay, so Chris, I'm just a huge fan of chaos. It's the reason why I watch wrestling and the Royal Rumble, which, by the way, I get to go to in a little over a week here in St. Louis. I'm so excited for it. But I'm curious if there's any chance that we might see a Mike Milbury moment where he casts everything aside, trades picks, does it, and brings in DiPietro as his number one pick as a total surprise of the draft. Is there anybody else that you could see potentially slotting into that number one spot instead of Shane Wright?
Yeah, it's going to be tough to knock him off, but I do think that there are some players that have definitely put themselves in a better position. And the one guy that you're hearing a lot more buzz about is Logan Cooley, the American center who plays the National Team Development Program. He is an exceptional young player, and really he's a fast and a more dynamic player. He's not as big as Shane Wright. He doesn't have the two-way skills of Shane Wright, but offensively, a bit more dynamic. And playing at the National Team Development Program, they play against college teams. And so you say, how is this guy who's not as big and not as strong doing against college teams? Well, he's been dominant against them. I happen to see him against the University of Wisconsin, scored a beautiful goal. He's faster, and he's got this tremendous skill level. The other guys that you kind of look at, you see Kamel on there, Matthew Savoy, really good. There's a guy that's not on our list that I think also a lot of teams still really love, and that's Ivan Marashchenko, the Russian who's currently playing the second pro division there. And he's a guy that hasn't had necessarily the great season. He didn't play in the World Juniors, wasn't invited. He was cut by Team Russia, but that was more because he had just recovered from COVID and wasn't ready to go. He wasn't, conditioning wasn't quite there. So that's a guy where you could just see him continue to build throughout the season and maybe get an opportunity at the World Under 18s to separate himself. So there are options there, but still no one has fully taken the mantle from Shane Wright at this point. But Logan Cooley, probably one of those guys that's at least put himself in the discussion.
Switching gears a little bit here, Chris, obviously with no NHLers going to the Olympics, there's the opportunity for some young guys to step in with the national teams and get that chance in Beijing. Looking at some of the Olympic rosters that are being released recently here, is there anything catching your eye?
Well, certainly, there's a lot of prospects that are going to be on the U.S. team, which we covered before. But you look at Slovakia, and they have two draft eligible players on their Olympic team, Simon Nemec and Juraj Slafkovsky, who we just saw in that graphic before, who plays in Finland. And Slafkovsky and Nemec have both been high-end players in the Slovakian system. They've been highly regarded. They helped them get to the second place at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, one of their best finishes at a tournament that they co-host. And so they've already played on the men's national team. They were on the World Junior team. Those are two exceptional young players that make me more excited to watch the Olympics because I'm looking forward to the future. We saw Rasmus Dahlin play in his draft season at the Olympics. Didn't have a huge role. I think that you're going to see both of those players in a more substantial lineup situation than Dahlin was in his draft season. And that very well could help them raise their draft stock just by being in that group. So we'll see a lot of prospects. Really looking forward to seeing what Canada ends up putting out there. We expect to see some prospects on that roster as well. So that's what gets me excited about the Olympics. We're going to see a lot of some of these young guys that have a chance to do something special on a big stage.
As always, Chris, appreciate the analysis. And yeah, there'll be plenty for us to chat about in the next couple of weeks here with your rankings and more Olympic rosters. We'll chat next week.
All right. Thanks, guys. Great to be with you.
Thank you, Chris.